Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Mount Union Football Huddle. I'm Review Sports Editor Mike Brown, joined by Mount Union beat writer Jeff Zupanik. Jeff, welcome again.
Thank you, Mike.
Before we turn to this week's game against Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, let's take a look back at last week's game when Mount went to New York State and played Hobart. Tell us a little bit about that game.
It was a very interesting game in terms of, the game started, it was 62 degrees and sunny, and then by the time the game ended, it was 35 and snowy, rainy, and windy. So it was, I think the game played out how you probably could have expected it to go. Mount Union, perfect start, got up 14-0 in that first quarter. There was a little bit of wind, took advantage of that. And second quarter, each team scored every time they had it, but Hobart did a great job controlling the time of possession. They had it for 12 minutes of the 15 and ran 30 plays.
Wow.
Mount Union had the ball one series. Now they did score, so they were up 21-14, and then they got tied early in the third quarter, but then I think the game kind of changed right after that with the whole weather, the way it came in. And again, one of my columns I wrote, I gave Vince Karras a tremendous job for taking the ball or making Hobart decide if they wanted the ball or the wind in the second half.
Right.
And it played out the way he just forecasted that when they won the toss, because they're usually a team that defers to the second half, but he wanted them to make the choice, and he felt that the past games that Mount has played in bad weather would serve them. And Hobart coach talked about that after the game. He said they don't play in bad weather. They weren't prepared. And he said it seemed like it affected them more than it did Mount Union.
Yeah, right. Well, talk about some of the key players from Mount Union last week's game, Jeff. Is there anybody who stands out there? Probably a lot of guys.
Well, I think the fact they got their running game going with both Bradley Mitchell and sophomore Jawanda Evans-Morris. They scored 4 of the 5 touchdowns, and they combined for about 160 yards. I think they kind of changed it up pace. Jawanda Evans-Morris is a little bit more physical than Mitchell is. So they started with Mitchell. He got them gained, and I think Hobart was kind of pushing up a little, so they were able to kind of run up the middle there with Evans-Morris, and then that opened it up for Mitchell. And then obviously you got to credit Dom Davis. I mean, playoff debut, he was 20 of 29, over 300 yards, and most importantly, no turnovers. And to quote Coach Karras after the game, I asked him to evaluate it. He said outstanding. I mean, point blank, and the great debut. And then the defense, obviously, I don't know if you probably the cornerbacks in the secondary, because they went up against what Coach Karras called an All-American wide receiver kid with 18 touchdowns, over 1,200 yards, and he had 4 catches in the first half, and they held him without a catch in the second half.
That's tremendous.
It was. I mean, Hobart kept going to them, but they did a great job kind of putting an umbrella up, Mount Union did, and not letting him get deep. They were giving him, 5, 6 yard catches, but they weren't giving up the deep ball to him, and that's his bread and butter. So I would say, though, the running game, the quarterback, and then the defense for sure.
Okay, and obviously Mount going on the road prior to a Stag Bowl was it the first time in 20 years in the playoffs,
exactly,
Jeff?
20 years, 1996.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that was the game up at Wisconsin Lacrosse. They played that game at Wisconsin's Camp
Randall
Randall Stadium.
Camp Randall. I remember that game.
So, I mean, it wasn't the best of conditions weather-wise, and so it was. I mean, they handled it well, and one of the point that Coach Karras, he thought it kind of serves as a bonding unit for such a young team to go on the road, have a long bus ride, and stay in the hotels and not have the comfort of being in their own bed, as he called it. I mean, after this weekend's game, they will been 3,700 miles on the road this year.
That's amazing.
And then, they've already set the school record for 7 road games, so this will be their 8th and 12th. The way the schedule worked out this year, and obviously, the way the playoffs are right now, you got to play them. But I mean, that's an awful lot of games, and it's given them a lot of time, this young team, to kind of grow together, I think, and get to know each other.
Sure, that's a good point. Well, they're the true road warriors this year.
Yes, they've been so far, no doubt. I mean,
Well, let's turn the clock ahead to this weekend's game. They're going to Baltimore to face Johns Hopkins. They have a history with Johns Hopkins. They've played them in their past, correct?
Yeah, they have. The most recent was 2012. It was a second-round game here at Mount Union Stadium. It was 55-13. Obviously, with such a gap between the two, there's probably not a lot of similarity. But 2012, that was a very experienced and senior-dominated Mount Union team, and they just kind of overwhelmed them. And, John Hopkins, very good team. They were conference champions. They're a team that's been in the playoffs a few years, and they like to go through the air, so that's something that Mount Union had been very familiar with. With the OAC, there was a lot more passing this year, and then with Hobart being a very pass-oriented team, so they're going to see a very similar team. They have one of their wide receivers was first-team all-conference. Their tight end was. Their quarterback was second-team all conference. So I mean, they're a team that's going to look to challenge you over the top.
Yeah, I know you were telling me it's interesting with Johns Hopkins. They're Division I in just about every sport except football. They're a D3, so their facilities are top rate over
Oh
there.
yeah, and they're probably the premier lacrosse program in the country. And the stadium that Mount will be playing at is the same one they use for lacrosse. So it's going to have top of the line press box and field lighting and everything. So I mean, interesting. That's the one nice thing is going to Hobart, just seeing what the campus was like. And I told you, we were talking. They have multiple soccer fields, field hockey fields, lacrosse, football field.
Wow.
And I mean, it's two colleges. It's actually called Hobart William Smith. William Smith is the girls' part of the college, and Hobart is the males' part of it. So they're very tradition rich in a lot of their sports.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anybody that you've heard that stands out for Johns Hopkins? I mean, obviously you said they like to throw the ball. Is it the quarterback? Is there a great receiver? Anybody?
I would say the wide receiver.
Okay.
Probably similar. Similar, but maybe not as good overall as the guy they saw this past weekend. But I think that's the guy they're going to look to go to. And especially with Mount Union having a younger secondary to try to take advantage of it now. I think the problem you've run into, we saw with North Carolina Wesleyan in the opener in Hobart, when you're kind of become one-dimensional and you're not even more so one-dimensional, you're going to one guy all the time. Eventually, they're going to start keying on that guy, and they did. They pretty much covered, Brandon Shedd from Hobart, double covered him, excuse me, and then they were giving up some passes to the other guys as a result of it. But again, one guy with 1,200 yards, you kind of pick your poison. You'd rather have a 6'4" tight end gain 18 yards as opposed to this guy getting 80 yards. So it was the adjustment they made, and they deserve a lot of credit for taking him out of the game.
Yeah, well, hopefully they'll get win number 2. They know what it's like being on the road in the playoffs early on now, so I think that's got to help them this week, because they know the routine.
Oh, and, they're going to, the same thing. They're going to have practice. They're going to have practice today. They're going to have a practice tomorrow on Thanksgiving, which they've had for the last 20-something years.
Right.
So, I mean, they're in the routine there. And then, without classes, I think it'll be maybe the travel will be a little easier. They're going to go down Friday, have a little walkthrough practice. Friday, they're going to have a nice team dinner Friday night.
That's
and
good.
Get at the game on noon on Saturday.
That's great. That's great. Well, I did want to ask you one last thing, Jeff. We were talking off camera, but were there any surprises around the country in the D3 playoffs to you last weekend?
Yeah, like I said, probably not so much the outcome, but just the one that stood out to me was Mary Hardin Baylor falling behind 14-0 early because they're, obviously they're ranked number 1 in the country, but they're a very powerful team. They have a number of guys that have been 4-year all-conference performers, so they're very experienced this year. And then there were a couple close games. Alfred, who is unofficially the number 1 seed in the bracket, Mount Union, and they had to go to overtime to win their game against an opponent that was, obviously if they don't win their conference, they're not in the tournament, but wasn't one of the stronger conferences. And then Wittenberg and Thomas More actually went to 4 overtimes.
Wow.
So there were some close games. There was a time where a lot of the games that starting at noon were all either within 1 score, and they were right there. And I think it was a very competitive opening weekend, and it really, what I think a lot of people think, it's a kind of a wide open field to a degree, but I think you're still eventually, the traditional teams are still going to surface, but I think it's kind of like a March Madness field that those early round there could be some upset, but eventually you think the better teams are going to prevail. So, I mean, there was a lot of close games for the sport. That's what you want to see.
It sure is. But like you said, all the traditional powers, the Linfields, the Mary Hardin Baylors, the Mount Unions, the Wisconsin Whitewaters, they all move on.
Yeah, they typically are the ones that kind of ride through. Every once in a while, North Central's been an up-and-comer. St. Thomas has made a couple. And then you have a team like Oshkosh that wants to, they're in the semifinals in 2012, lost to St. Thomas, that they kind of want to prove that, we got a chance to challenge Whitewater for this Wisconsin Conference supremacy, so they're going to need. And then, John Carroll, they're a team that, they're riding off the momentum of the Mount Union win. I was going to be interested to see how they handled that, and they got up early on all of that, which I think helped them. And they're going to play Wesley, who Mount Union's very familiar with, and very physical team, and that's going to be up at John Carroll. But I expect that to be a good game also.
Well, that's good. Well, I think that'll do it for this week's edition of the Huddle. Good luck to the Purple Raiders on Saturday. That game will kick off at noon on Saturday, correct, Jeff?
Yep.
So until next week, for Jeff Supanik, this is Mike Brown. We'll see you on the gridiron.